Are comics still for kids? I think honestly, if you were to ask most people, a lot of people would say not really anymore. But there is an area where I do find that they are. We're going to talk about it today and the history of what happened. Why is it all dudes that look like me and older that are into this and not kids anymore? And is that really true, or is that just the rhetoric that people really like to say? Obviously, when comics came out, it was the golden age, and you had Superman, you had the Phantom, Shazam, Wonder Woman, and all obvious, bright, big, bold characters designed for children to enjoy as cheap, colorful entertainment. In the 50s, famously, there was an additional push to really ensure that kids' comics stayed kids' comics with Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent, where they took out all the crudeness, any horror, anything that could even possibly be, in today's standards, even PG, was removed from comics. And comics were maybe the most for kids they ever had been at that point. Not to mention the cheap newsstand access. You're talking about 10-cent books at every corner. It was pocket money entertainment. Honestly, this shift towards more adult readers came even decades and decades ago. It's not as recent as you think. I would say mainly the 70s. You had artists like Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Conway doing topics like drug addiction, racism, with X-Men, death. Let's bring up Gwen Stacy here. So comics had a natural maturing point. Those kids that had read the comics grew up and they wanted a little bit more than the good guy just punches the bad guy and that's the end. In addition to those corner newsstand shops, you also started getting actual comic shops with what we call direct editions in the late 70s, but most people know it as 1980 on up. So the shops eventually replaced the newsstands, and suddenly the core buyers were collectors, meaning like teens and people trying to collect certain issues rather than maybe read them like a more innocent kid would. Not saying collectors didn't read. We obviously know they did that too, but there was a sort of shift. Now, the 80s was the 70s on steroids. This is when stuff got really dark. In fact, maybe the 80s was even the darkest comics have ever been, even with today's standards. These are really the grown-up comics. Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, Mouse. Independent comics were getting some massive attention, and they were almost always rough and dirty. This, for the record, is my favorite era of comic writing. I've just always liked that darker edge, but that's just me. And then another unfortunate thing happened where you had the greed boom, right? So 90s on up till today, especially if you take an inflation calculator, if you look at what a 10-cent comic was in 1961 versus today's prices, and then you look at the average mid-90s comic book to today's prices, you can see that the average price of comics just quadrupled. So kids weren't really able to afford comics anymore, and it got so tailored towards the collectors picking this stuff up. I mean, hell, dude, you guys know, comics are like $5.99 today. It has gotten ridiculous. And unfortunately, I don't really know or see how that could ever change. Even if we got rid of all the inflation in the world and the economy was just like absolutely gorgeous, would they really ever go back? The content and tone changed. Mainstream titles are violent, morally complex, and continuity heavy, not super accessible for kids. And surveys will even show, like ICV2, shows that the average comic shop buyer is in their 30s, 40s, 50s, rather than the young ones, right? It's overwhelmingly adult. Now, comics still are for kids. DC, Image, Marvel, they produce titles that are specifically for children. My local comic book shop has an entire kids wall with new releases that come out weekly, and they do a really good job of keeping that spotlighted, and I know that the town actually does get kids in there. Now, they're probably rich kids, but nonetheless, there are kids accessing some new books. I would say one of the big things that's different now, maybe the 2000s up, is it's all about graphic novels with kids. So these young adult literature and the graphic novels, even when I was young and in like the Scholastic Book Fair in elementary school, all the Simpsons graphic novels, everyone was grabbing up. Well, that's kind of still going on right now. So that type of stuff is moving for kids. And I don't need to tell you, but maybe I will in case you don't know, manga, anime is actually even bigger than comics. My Hero Academia, One Piece, Demon Slayer dominates young readers worldwide. I mean, it actually dwarfs comic reading pretty badly. It's kind of sad to me. So accessible, cheap volumes are what kids are grabbing, big time. They are still enjoying the hobby in their own different way. So no, you're not really seeing the kids picking up these single issues, but they are going about it in a very different way than kind of how we did. Now, I said in the beginning, I wanted to talk about what the kids are doing, and it's all about what's their price point. So I have found that kids actually are really into back issue comics. If you have a dollar bin in your local comic book shop, that's where you will find the kids digging through, trying to find cool stuff. I'm set up in a room at an antique shop that's across from a middle school, and they love to come in and they go for the 90s stuff. They go for the foils and the die cuts and anything that kind of has a cool cover. So they are attached to that gimmickiness and they view it as antiques. They go into antique shops looking for comic books, but they only really have $1 to spend. So if you've got the price point for kids, they're actually still pretty interested in it, and they like the collecting angle quite a bit. The next generation of collectors, from my experience, I think it actually looks pretty strong. As for the whole kids reading the newest ongoing series, that's what I'm really not seeing. But they are diving into manga, the anime. They're doing graphic novels. They're definitely doing the wait till the book comes out and then they read it sort of thing. And they're grabbing the more accessible stuff. So we got to remember that the future of the hobby is with this next generation. Do you think we should switch and make stuff more accessible? But it would come at a sacrifice at our awesome continuity and adult themes that we love so much. Do you think it's worth it? Do you think kids really are interested in this stuff? Do you think it varies based on state, geography, social status? I mean, I know every year you guys have probably seen Christmas and Halloween. I give out free comics to kids all the time. Sometimes I actually even include expensive stuff in there to plant that seed of like ooh, you got something really awesome there and grow that collector sense. But I just know that I got so much joy and wonder in my youth from reading these comics. Even though I was reading the heavy, ridiculous stuff, I loved it, man. And it is kind of sad to me that the kids might not be into that, but they're getting it just in a little bit of a different way. Want to know your thoughts? Drop it down below. Keep on hunting. Some of you know that I have a room set up in an antique shop in New Jersey. Well, I seem to be doing okay because people know me from YouTube. They come and see the stuff. But a lot of the other vendors rely heavily on foot traffic. And there has been construction not only blocking the sideway, but actually so far as blocking the entrance of our stinking building for like 3 months now. Most people know to come and park somewhere else, but it's really hurting the foot traffic for the other vendors. So for the foreseeable future, to help the other guys out in this building, I'm just going to say that if you get at least one thing from any other vendor, all my $10 and under stuff is going to be 30% off.